Hey Liz, how about another coffee over here, huh? Detective Rick shouted. Yeah, I'll take one more myself, the other officer said. The diner was lively that night, full of all the regulars that came to Charlie's on a Tuesday night. Rick and Steve were out at their favorite coffee shop enjoying a new promotion they'd received for their parts in cleaning up the streets. Since the two became partners a couple of years back, the crime rate had plummeted. The streets were as clean as ever in the small town. They were getting congratulated by just about everyone there. Even the coffee that night was on the house. Rick gazed out the window. Look at our little town, Steve. Clean and simple. We've done one hell of a job. Steve was staring down at his cup and seemed to be daydreaming. Steve, you with me, buddy? Steve quickly looked up at Rick as he snapped out of his daze. Oh, yeah. Yeah, but, we did some fine work out there. You all right, man? You seem a little off, Rick said. Yeah, no, I'm good. Just a little bit tired is all, Steve replied. Well, I for one am one happy son of a bitch. Look at all those smiling faces, buddy, Rick said with a huge grin. We've come a long way this last year. Cops working the beat to detective. I know it was only a matter of time before the brass came to their senses. Since I was a kid, all I've ever wanted to do was clean the scum off of our beautiful streets. Hell, we've gotten so many bastards out of here that there won't be anybody left to put in jail. He laughed as he took a big drink of his coffee. Are you sure you're okay, pal? You look a little shitty tonight, Rick asked again. Yeah, I'm good, Rick, Steve replied. Come on, buddy. Let's get out of here and call it a night. I'll take you back home so you can get some rest, huh? Rick insisted. The two cops got up and walked to the police cruiser. Rick looked around as they walked, admiring the perfect little town. The drive to Detective Steve's house was mostly quiet, except for the radio. Finally, Steve looked at Rick and asked, Do you ever think about that night? The things we did to those people? Rick was silent for a second. Suddenly, he gave Steve an awful glare and said in a loud tone, Damn it, Steve. I told you to never mention that night. Ever. We talked about this, didn't we, buddy? Just keep our cool and forget it ever happened, and no one will ever know. Steve gazed out the car window, watching as the town's lights passed by. It's just that tomorrow is 1 year to the day, and I said, Shut the fuck up about it, Rick yelled. Just keep your mouth shut and your eyes forward. We didn't get this promotion for no reason. The trash in this city needed to be dealt with, and goddamn it, we dealt with it. Doesn't matter how we did it. The crackheads and whores are off the streets of our beautiful town, and I'll be damned if it ever gets like that again. We just had the balls to do what nobody else was willing to do, and that's why we got promoted. End of story. Nobody needs to know the damn details, and I don't want to hear another goddamn word about it either. The car came to an abrupt stop. We'll see you tomorrow. Okay, buddy? Rick said in a calm, soft tone. Yeah, okay, replied Steve as he opened the car door and stepped out. Steve walked inside and went to the refrigerator for a beer. He needed something to take the edge off and get things off of his mind. The flashbacks of pulling the trigger and hearing the loud bang of the gun kept replaying over and over in his head. He felt so guilty about that night, about what they had done. A year ago, they busted a drug house that had allegedly been filled with junkies. This wasn't some assignment from the chief. It was something they talked about doing under the radar. They wanted the streets clean in their little town. They wanted the streets clean in their little town. They didn't want to ask permission to make it that way. They wanted things to be perfect, and they would be willing to do whatever it took to make that happen. This time, instead of arresting the alleged druggies and giving them a chance to get back out on the streets, they decided to take more drastic measures. At first it was only a joke, It's just something they talked about. The more they joked about it, the more it became real. On one summer night, the two police officers decided to make it a reality. A cold, dark reality that Steve couldn't escape. They burst into the door with guns drawn. One by one, Rick kicked them to the ground. He pulled his Beretta and fired a bullet right in between the girl's eyes without hesitation. She couldn't have been more than 20 years old. One after another, Rick pulled the trigger, almost as if he enjoyed himself, like he'd been thinking about doing this his whole life. Now you, Rick told Steve. I'm not going to be the only one doing all the work here. You want these streets clean? Then you have to get your hands a little dirty, he said. Steve's hand shook as he lifted the gun. He closed his eyes and fired. The bullet passed through the front of the man's head and out the back as blood sprayed on the wall behind him. Once they were all dead, they had to get rid of the evidence. As cops themselves, they knew exactly how to clean up a crime scene. The memory of that night sent a shiver down his spine. Sure, it was all Rick's idea. Rick wanted nothing more than to clean up his small hometown. He couldn't stand the sight of bums, prostitutes, and other criminals that littered the streets. He was going to do whatever it took to make that town clean and nice again, like when he was a kid. Rick convinced me, he thought to himself. I didn't want to do it, but he made me. Besides, it was just a bunch of fucking drug addicts. You know what? Fuck them. Fuck them all. So we executed him. We put a bullet in every one of their fucking heads and buried them in a big mass grave deep in the woods. Yeah, fuck 'em, he thought. Nothing but a bunch of junkies, not worth my worry. He took a big swig from the bottle and wiped his mouth with the sleeve of his shirt. Rick turned on the TV and kicked his feet up on the coffee table. He tried to relax, but the thoughts of the night kept coming and going. I need something stronger than beer, he thought. He went to the kitchen and grabbed a bottle of Kentucky bourbon off the top of the refrigerator. Now, this is what I'm talking about, he said. Steve poured the bourbon into a glass and took a huge gulp. He felt the warm booze flow down his throat and into his stomach. Oh, now that's more like it. Steve stood there for a moment, holding his bourbon and staring at the floor. Suddenly, he heard loud scratching noises outside of the front door. Sound startled him and he dropped the glass to the floor. It shattered all around his boots. What the hell was that? He went and opened the door. Nothing was there. It was quiet. It was dark out, so he couldn't see much except for some light coming from a street lamp in front of his house. The eerie quiet sent goosebumps up and down his arms. He looked into the street, and under the street lamp, he noticed something. He walked onto his yard to take a closer look. There was a shoe lying in the street. The shoe was bloody. The blood was fresh, still wet. He looked up and down the street both ways to see if he could see anybody, but all he could see was the darkness. Is anybody there? He yelled. I'm a cop. Don't fuck with me. We'll have your ass arrested, motherfucker. He kicked at the shoe, but lost his footing and fell. By now the alcohol had kicked in and he was a little bit wobbly. He slowly got up while murmuring, "Motherfuckers," to himself. Steve turned to walk back to the house. He looked up and became frozen with fear. Standing on his lawn were 4 people. All of them were staring at him, and none of them were moving. The buzzed feeling he had just seconds ago was completely swallowed up by a sense of fear and anxiety. What the fuck? Who the fuck are you? He yelled as he walked a little closer. Suddenly it hit him like a freight train. He realized exactly who they were. Every single one of them had a bullet hole in their head. They were covered in dirt and maggots. All of their faces were purple-bluish color. Each one had blood flowing from the hole in their foreheads as if they were just shot seconds ago. His heart thumped against his chest, and his hand shook uncontrollably. It was the dark reality of his past, standing on his front lawn, staring him right in the face. No, no, you fuckers are dead. We killed you, Steve yelled. We put a fucking bullet in all of your heads, you fucking junkies. You wanna fuck with me? I'll kill you all again if I have to. He reached down into his belt, where he always kept his service-issued Beretta. He looked back up and pointed the gun at the people standing in his front yard. Just as fast as they had come, they had vanished. Nobody was standing in his yard. He was there all alone. The only company he had was the darkness of the night and his thoughts. He shook his head and composed himself. He walked back inside and grabbed his cell phone. He had to tell Rick what had just happened. He knew he wasn't crazy. Those people they killed were there, right there in his front yard. Steve ran inside and grabbed his phone. He paused for a moment before dialing. Rick's gonna think I'm fucking insane. He's gonna think that I'm losing it. He was always a selfish piece of shit. He always looked down on me, like he's better than me, a better man, even a better cop. Fucking prick. Steve shook his head again and closed his eyes tight. No, he needs to know about this. Maybe he can help. He dialed Rick's number, and after a couple of rings, Rick picked up. God damn it. What is it now? He answered. Rick, man, you gotta help me. The people, the people we killed, they're here at my house. They were here, man. Please. They want something from me. I need your help, please. Just hold on, buddy, okay? I'll be right there, Rick replied. Rick walked out of his study and into the living room. He would often go in there and stare at his awards. From all his years in law enforcement, nothing pleased him more than to think about everything he'd accomplished as an officer, to think about how he'd finally cleaned up the streets for good in his town. Hey, honey, I got a crime scene, something downtown. Don't wait up, he said to his wife as he put on his coat and walked out the door. About 15 minutes later, Rick pulled up to Steve's house. He walked up and banged on the door. Steve swung the door open in a panic. Jesus Christ, Steve, have you been drinking? You look like hammered dog shit, he said. Rick, they were here, man. The druggies we killed. They were as clear as I'm seeing you right now, man. This wasn't just in my head, okay? I'm telling you, these fuckers were here at my house. They want their revenge. They want to kill us just like we killed them. Rick put his hand on Steve's shoulder and put his finger up to his lips. Shh. Just calm down, all right? You've been drinking and you got yourself all worked up, bud. That's all this is, said Rick. I'm telling you, man. They were, Rick interrupted by putting his hand up in the air to quiet Steve. Here's what we're gonna do, Rick said. I'm gonna drive you out to where we buried their bodies. And I'm gonna show you that they're all still dead and still buried, all right? What do you say? Rick asked. After a moment of silence, Steve replied, Okay. Okay, yeah, man. The drive felt like an eternity. Neither of them spoke a word the entire way. After about an hour, they reached a small, hard-to-see dirt road that led to a secluded place near the woods. Another 20 minutes of driving down the dirt road, and then they had to walk. They walked for about 15 more minutes until they reached a large open area with a lot of debris and brush. Rick walked over to an especially large empty spot in the area. This is it. This is where we buried them. As you can see, the dirt is still here. Nobody's been digging around or found anything. About 6 feet under my boots are all four dead drug addict motherfuckers who got exactly what they deserved. By now, they're nothing but skeletons. By now, they're nothing but skeletons. The worms have done all their work and got rid of what was left of those pieces of shit. They ain't coming back, bud. They're all in hell, where they belong, and they ain't ever coming back, you understand? Rick stared at Steve with cold, dead eyes. Well, do you feel better? Rick asked. Yeah, I felt better, Steve said as he stared at the empty patch of dirt under Rick's boots. Rick pulled his gun out from the inside of his jacket and raised it up to Steve's head. Rick, what are you doing? He asked. Sorry, buddy, but this is a long time coming. You're gonna get us caught, and I just can't have that. This is my town, and it's nice, and it's clean, the way I've always pictured it. You couldn't just let this shit go, could you? You had to go and grow a conscience on me. All you had to do was shut the fuck up and forget that it ever happened. I didn't want to do this, but I can see that you aren't gonna leave me with a choice. Now I'm gonna kill you, and I'm gonna bury you with the other pieces of shit. Steve saw something move behind Rick. Rick, the Rick, there's something behind you. Rick laughed. You think that trick's gonna work? Come on, bud. How dumb do you think I am? I've always been the smart one, and you've always been the dumbass. I carried you to that promotion. You'd still be handing out parking tickets if it wasn't for me. Now it's time to die with whatever dignity you have left. The sound of a stick broke loudly behind Rick. He quickly whipped around and pointed his gun. You? Rick screamed. I fucking killed you. I fucking killed all of you. Shots rang into the night as the crows flocked from the trees. The ghoulish figures didn't even flinch as they came closer and closer. They reached out with bloody, cold hands and pulled him in. Rick screamed as they ripped and tore at his flesh. They reached into his stomach and pulled out his intestines. Blood spewed through the air and all over Steve. He was frozen in horror, watching these things tear Rick's body apart. After a moment, Rick's screams became nothing but gurgling sounds. Steve suddenly felt lightheaded. He couldn't breathe. His legs buckled beneath him and everything went black. Steve opened his eyes. He had no idea where he was. He wasn't in the woods anymore, he knew that. The room was small and the walls were white with padding. He looked down and saw that he was wearing some sort of straitjacket. "Hello?" he yelled. "Somebody, please." Minutes ticked by, or maybe even hours. He had no idea how long he'd been in that small room. The door finally opened, and two people walked in wearing white coats, and they were accompanied by a police officer. "Steve, glad to see you up and around. I'm Dr. Martin, and this is Nurse Jane." The nurse smiled and tilted her head to one side. "Why am I here?" he asked. "Well, Steve, the police found you in the woods, passed out and covered in blood. You'd been missing for a few days, and the search party finally found you lying face down in the dirt. They thought you were dead, but after a close inspection, they got a bit of a pulse. You spent a few days in the hospital, and after they determined you were all right, they sent you here to our facility. Now, the bad news is that they also found the mutilated body of your partner, Rick. It would appear that you took a knife and cut him up to bits. Made a real mess. It took them a couple days to identify the body due to the extreme nature of the killing. When they searched you, they found the knife that was used to kill your partner." Now that wasn't me," Steve exclaimed. "That was the ghosts of the people we killed. You gotta believe me." The doctor turned to the nurse and whispered something in her ear. She smiled and shook her head. "Listen, Steve, we've got a lot of tests to run, so you're gonna be here for a very long time," the doctor said. "Please try and get comfortable." The nurse, doctor, and officer walked out of the room. The door closed with a loud thud and click as the door locked behind them. "No! Please, don't leave me. It was the ghosts who killed Rick," he yelled. Steve started to feel dizzy again, so he turned around to go sit back down on the bed. He looked up, and there they were again. They just stood there and stared. All four of the people they killed, with bullet holes in their heads and all. Blood flowed down their faces. They just stared at him, not saying a word. One of them was holding Rick's mutilated head. "Please, no. Leave me alone," he shouted. They all smiled at him. and the blood ran down their faces and over their purple, decaying lips. He ran to the door and started screaming at the top of his lungs for help. He screamed as loud as he could, but no one came. Through the small bars on the other side of the wall, all he could see was blackness and hear the echoes of his screams. Thank you for listening to another episode of Dark and Twisted Tales. This week's episode, Small Town Charm, was written and produced by William Bowser. If you'd like to hear more Dark and Twisted Tales, please like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you, and good night.